What I try to share with people about Poe is once you get past the horror and you get into those deeper levels, you feel that pain or you see those glimmers of beauty in the dark. That is especially powerful, and that is true of Shakespeare, that is true of Poe. The House of Montresor is a sequel to Edgar Allan Poe's Cask of Amontillado. Jason Strutz is the illustrator, and I've been working with Jason now for over a decade. We did a comic anthology inspired by Edgar Allan Poe. It's called Poe Twisted, and the idea is stories, choose your favorite Edgar Allan Poe story, kind of twist it and tell something new. So that collection, 13 different artists and writers taking their favorite Poe story and doing a new diabolical twist. He wanted to do a Cask of Amontillado adaptation, and that's part of the comic, and then do the graphic novel together. He had this great sensibility. He gets the humor in Poe. There's not just horror, there's a lot of humor, and he got the twist of all of that. As the writer, I'm leading you somewhere, and if I'm doing it well, you want to be there. You want to be led there. And what I hope is that I probably didn't write the story that was in Poe's head, but I hope he would be touched and flattered that he gave his characters such interiority that they went on to live in someone else's head. I do like to say that comics helped get me my job. I was traveling the country, different comic conventions, this kind of thing. My husband and I, we had just moved to Baltimore, and I was working in DC at the time and really getting sick of that commute. About 3 or 4 months later, completely independently, the position for director came up. When it came up that I had written a book, one of the people in my interview had said, well, you know, there's Poe House in the history, it's really great, but you know, we also sell bobbleheads. I'm like, oh, well, I write comic books. That's how I got my job, but it's a dream job. Poe House is significant, not just because Poe lived here. It's the last surviving home in the city of Baltimore where Poe and his family were known to have lived, but this is the house where Poe turns to short story writing, and this is the house where Poe begins his professional career. Poe's mother, an actress, she is known in Richmond, Virginia. The ladies rally around her as she is dying, and the theater appeals to the public on her behalf, saying this beautiful light of the stage is dying and needs help. And Poe's mother passes away. Something pretty cataclysmic happens to their family, and the 3 children are divided up between different families. And then Poe taken in by the Allan family, which is how we get Edgar Allan Poe. Poe raised by a foster family, but never formally adopted. Always told he is their foster son, always told that he must be grateful for the things that they give him. The blood ties that remain in Baltimore eventually become quite important, and then ultimately when Poe and his foster family are estranged, Poe finds refuge with his blood relatives here in the city of Baltimore. And what's fascinating about his family here in Baltimore is Poe is raised in relative comfort by the Allan family in Richmond, but never allowed to truly be comfortable in his home with them. Whereas the Poes have nothing, the Clems have nothing, and yet, based on this blood tie, they welcome Edgar. And so while he's living at N Amity St, he sends a story into a local periodical called the Baltimore Saturday Visitor and wins first prize for tale and writing. And this is the first money that Poe receives professionally for his work, and literally launches his professional career. Years later in West Baltimore, the entire block, including Poe's house, is scheduled for demolition. When the Edgar Allan Poe Society of Baltimore, when they hear that the last surviving home where Poe and his family lived about to be destroyed and swept away forever, they step in and beg the city to please save the house. A deal is struck that if the Poe Society can in fact authenticate which side of the house Poe and his family lived in, the house is a duplex, that is the side of the house that they will save, and that's what happens in 1940. The Poe Society steps in about 9 years later, turns the house into a museum, and we've been in a museum almost continuously since 1949. My impression is that Poe wrote from a very sensory point of view because he describes things so vividly, but what is most important about Poe is that he approaches stigma and looks at it unflinchingly or even luxuriates in something that a lot of people would like to put in the shadows, or something talked about things that other people might have considered shameful. And Poe is one of the first people to inhabit that space on purpose, to speak from the point of view of the murderer, the insane soul. I interpret that to be really drawing a direct line from Poe to the present day, sharing with people the outsized impact that Poe has had on popular culture. We can actually use Poe's story to talk about these kinds of issues, and lets us really look at how we still to this day entertain the stigma as opposed to looking at it and being clear about it. And I really hope that the museum, as we celebrate Poe's legacy and see the true intention in his work, we can look at Poe in a different way, and we can look at these ills in society in a different way too. And I think a museum should always open that conversation, always be a place where that starts. And that's what I hope for Poe House.